Today's live webinar is titled Leading from the Middle. I'm your host today. My name is Linda Traylor, for those of you who don't know me. I head up the medical affairs function at Acceleration Point. I've been in industry in the medical affairs space for almost 3 decades. I started MSLing in the early 2000s and moved up from there and across multiple companies, big and small, diagnostics, devices, therapeutics. I moved over to consulting about 5 years ago. And I've been working with, I think I'm about north of 100 teams on various trainings and topics around med impact and really coaching and training to skills, enhancing the quality of insights. A lot of fun topics that are one of my favorite topics. And today is one of them. All right. So what's in scope today? The conversation is going to be centered around how to operationalize from a middle manager perspective the requests and asks that are coming in from leadership for your team to really to move into more of a strategic mindset. What is out of scope today, just so we're clear, this is not going to be a conversation about the quality of your medical plan, the quality of your the care gaps defined, the behaviors you're trying to change. We're assuming that you have some level of medical plan in place, and this really is focused on becoming a strategic leader as a field medical leader. So I hope that's what you joined for. That's what we're going to be focused on. So most people on here, and this is really intended for people who are in the field leader position. You have MSLs reporting to you. You're aspiring to be one, or you have MSL managers that are reporting into you. All three stakeholders have some connection and view and investment in your mid-level leaders as a leader or reporting into you, becoming a strategic-minded leader. And that takes practice, and it's a skill that needs to be developed. What triggered this conversation, what triggered this webinar is that, again, I work with a lot of teams, and we've heard, I don't know how many times, we've lost count, but some version of this statement that every function thinks they're helping the team, my team is drowning, and we still have to demonstrate impact. And so whenever we are overloaded with all of these requests that are coming in to our teams, if we have not developed that strategic-minded mindset to really to filter the requests that are coming in against what your team is doing, their capacity, their priorities, we'll go through all of that today. We default to a couple of different modes. I know I did a lot. And so we're going to talk about what those are and what they look like in practice, and how we can to have a mindset shift that moves us to more of a strategic leadership role or mode. So let's start off the conversation and just make sure we're getting everything in chat. What is being asked of your field teams right now? Like this week, last week, what's coming through to you guys? What's being asked of your teams? Let's hear some of those things. Insights from the field. KPI dashboard against launch. That's right. Demonstrating impact beyond engagement metric. Well, that's a good one. Insights from the field. Yeah. Insights, engagement, territory plans, who we're talking to, training, quality insights. Yeah. I personally am working with at least 4 teams right now on improving quality of insights. So that is a big ask. So we're going to talk a little bit about why that is a challenge, because if the quality of insights are in question, why? Let's talk that through today. Yeah, focusing on engagement, insights generated from certain hospitals. Yes, targeted segments. We're going to really focus in on that today. So some of the things that I wanted to start off with is, as I said, I've been doing this a long time, but I've also worked with hundreds of teams on topics around what we're discussing today. But one of the things, like knowing what I know now, what would I do different? This is an exercise that I have started implementing on a regular basis, whether it be in the form of a postmortem or just thinking through things that I've done recently or a long time ago. Knowing what I know now, what would I do different? And the biggest, like looking at from the perspective of what I know now from my experience from and working with a lot of very smart people. The biggest change I've made that I think would have made me a better leader when I was just starting out or even developing my skill is pausing. I know that sounds so weird, but pausing and shifting to what I call a curiosity mindset. And the reason why is because it slows things down. And the biggest thing that you can do when assessing all of these asks that become very pressure oriented requests is to just pause and slow things down. So, and that's a skill. That's a skill. And we're going to talk about it today. It takes practice. And for me, especially because I wasn't very good at it. But really, it is whenever we're pressured, these are the things that happen to me. And I know I'm not alone here. But whenever, before I had the ability to kind of pause and think and have a more of a strategic mindset as a leader, I would default to one of two modes. I call it just get it done or defense mode. And these look like, and you guys are going to recognize this. And if I saw all of your faces, you'd be like doing this. I know. So it's like when we're under pressure, when things are being thrown at us, we go into either just get it done, like just push it. I call it the pass-through leader. Like you just push it out to your team without really any context, and you're really optimizing just to get it done and check it off the list, get that dopamine hit and just crossing something off your list. And that results in dashboards that are very activities heavy because there's no context behind it. And again, that context is key here. Defense mode. This is where I think things like servant leadership, we all like. I know a lot of people use that phrase, and it can certainly be weaponized inadvertently. But being a servant leader does not mean you're always in defense mode. That your team is overwhelmed. Not mama bear. We're slammed. We can't take this on without assessing the strategic value of what the ask is. So and what we don't realize when we're in defense mode, we're actually sabotaging our team. We're not allowing them an opportunity to add strategic value by not assessing the request against your strategic priorities. So we're going to go through that today. What we really want to focus on today is what does it take? And I know when everybody puts these things up, our first response is, well, I already know this. We know this, but operationalizing it is the hard part. Knowing it is the easy part. So one of the things that we want to really focus in on is strategic leaders. That opportunity mode is a mindset. And that doesn't mean you're saying yes to everything. My team can do this, but it also means in context of this, it can't do this, or the trade-off is. And in order to do that, we have to get good at demonstrating our team's value by communicating their contribution to impact clearly. And that's not just saying they're busy, they're reaching out to KOLs, and they are bringing back insights. That's not demonstrating impact. And so we're going to go deep into what that looks like today. And the output of being able to do that is by you're inspiring your teams with purpose. If they understand what they're doing every day, it's connection to your organizational strategy, as well as improved patient care. That's the purpose that gives them drive. Also, a key element here is create a culture of teamwork that supports individual performance. Here's what it looks like if you don't have it. If you have team members that don't have the confidence or feel safe enough to be vulnerable, ask for help, and collaborate with their peers, you do not have a culture of teamwork. If you don't have a culture of teamwork, you have to address that first. And also, what we don't quite do well, especially when we're in defensive mode, is hold our teams accountable, because we're all stressed and it's like chaos. And holding him accountable to commitment means you have to have a clear cut on what success looks like. And so we'll talk through what that looks like today. Is this resonating with everybody? Makes sense? All right. So there are two strategic framings. Hopefully I get some thumbs up here in a second. By the way, if you see me do this today, that is me high-fiving. It's not talk to the hand. Okay. All right. So there are two strategic mindsets that you or framings that you need to start moving towards moving towards as being a strategic leader. First is you have to be able to communicate your team's opportunity universe, and we'll talk about what that is. The second thing you have to be able to do is be able to communicate their opportunities to learn in context of their capacity and what their current strategic priorities are. So let's take a look at their universe of opportunities. It is not a KOL call list. It is an engagement strategy to the right audience at the right time connected to strategic impact. I know those are just words. But what that means is even if our primary engagement is providers in this 5 Ps, I call them 5 Ps, patients, providers, payers, policymakers, and partners or peers. Even if our primary engagement is with providers, we have to understand the patient perspective. Payers have a lot of pressure points on providers, so we got to understand those. Policymakers, we oftentimes have initiatives around changing guidelines or changing clinical practice. And then obviously we need to be able to leverage our resources and our partners and peers internally and externally in order to get things done. This is your whole universe of opportunities. And even if you're engaged with only one element of it, you need to have an understanding of your full universe. It's meaningful. And being able to communicate that is part of being a strategic leader and understanding all of these connections. The other thing is, from a strategic framing standpoint, is being able, as a field medical leader, being able to communicate your team's value story in just a few sentences takes practice. A lot of, I work with a lot of field medical leaders, and they default often to very high-level generic responses, like we're collecting insights, we're focusing on bringing insights in. But we really need to get specific about that. So we are gathering insights, or we are learning, fill in the blank, from a very specific audience within our universe. But we've got to know what level of accessibility we have to that universe. Your MSLs are constantly developing relationships that allow the organizations to understand the patient journey. Now, what does that mean? Again, those are big level words. But what does it mean in practice? That means that whenever an MSL is in developing a relationship and they've got a whole bunch of insights they've been requested to listen for, and they're still in developing the relationship mode, they're trumping their overall primary goal for that meeting is to make sure they can come back. Otherwise, you don't have access. If you go in and you just focus on getting everything you need without spending time developing a relationship, they don't have access. They won't be able to get the next meeting. So you have to leave time for that. And as an MSL leader, you've got to be able to communicate the level of access your team has to their universe of opportunity, their HCPs that they're targeting. And that is hard to do because MSLs sometimes don't want to admit their lack of or their challenges with getting those meetings. And that's where we can't overlook the work that goes in there. Otherwise, we won't be able to get the things like what are the evidence gaps and insight needs and access barriers per territory. Often defining what's not in scope and why. This is like whenever an initiative comes and the audience has been defined and the MSLs don't necessarily have access to that audience, let's say it's community HCPs, they're going to default to going to their KOL list they have access to. But we don't need to learn from them in this particular initiative, say. So it's not in scope. So we need to learn about the use of said diagnostic test in the community HCPs. And all of the insights are coming in from academic KOLs because that's who they have access to. That is out of sync and is not helping strategic decision making. So you need to be very specific on what's not in scope and why. The capacity allocation we're going to spend some time on today, and this is really, we have an entire webinar on doing capacity modeling, and if you want access to that, there's going to be a QR code at the end, and we have a free complimentary capacity model spreadsheet we can send. We don't mind, and we can help you out with that. Here's operationalizing that capacity, though, is where the challenge lies. It's not just understanding how many days in field your team has. in the overall bandwidth. It's understanding how they're using that 165 days. That is the average number of in-field days for an MSL team based on all of my experience across multiple teams doing capacity models. It's somewhere between 160 and 170 on average of days in field that they have, taking out vacation, team meetings, holidays, and shutdowns. You take all of that away, and your teams have around 160 to 170, sometimes 180 days in field. So how are they spending that time? What is the ratio of the deep engagement versus the broad reach versus the full universe? And where are the capacity constrained? And what does that mean? Because when we say our teams don't have the bandwidth to do this, you're going to generate a question. And if you can't answer that question, then you can't with confidence say your team doesn't have the bandwidth. And then we got to move into current contributions to strategic impact. A lot of times when somebody asks us, what are your teams working on? We go to the medical plan, or we go to our listening priorities. But we need to get more specific, because we need to our teams are operationalizing the listening priorities by seeing this audience in 25% of their time with the anticipation of collecting said X number of data, so that we can, and this part of the missing piece, do something with that information. Not only does the strategic leader that's sending the request need to know that, your MSLs need to know that. And always share the wins. Where is field intelligence already shaping brand and medical strategy? Because that gives them the purpose. That's the fuel for the engine that keeps it going. So let's double click. And yes, Stephanie, yes, I agree. How are you tracking your team's capacity right now? Is it mostly CRM? Are you doing it in a spreadsheet? Have you a capacity model? How are you doing it? CRM mostly, I bet, is probably what I'm seeing a lot. Viva dashboards. Yep. A lot of dashboards created from CRM. Yep. Because there's a lot of variables that go into tracking a team's capacity, not just all of their activities, but what are their priorities and what percentage of time and what is their universe. So capacity is just one variable. And most of the time, the max capacity is just the guardrail. And so we always need to understand that if this is our max capacity, they can't go above this. That doesn't mean they're spending all of their capacity on any one given thing at any one time. Yep, CRMs and dashboards. So if the dashboards only generate activity, CRM, Tableau, yeah. So we're pulling the data out of the CRM, and we're creating some dashboards that will likely have these different variables put together on activity versus some of their initiatives versus where they are in that. What we need to get better, what I'm seeing in a lot of those is they're still just very activities heavy on how many people we saw over at a given time and how is that changing over time. And so those are good performance metrics. And I'm not saying they need to go away. I'm not one of those people that said we don't need to measure activity. I'm just saying activity metrics are not your primary output for demonstrating capacity. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like too. Let's start with the 3 steps that a strategic leader needs to be able to do. This is a skill you need to develop. And so at the end, I suggest that how you can go and assess yourself against this framework, you'll understand what that looks like. First step 1 is clarify the ask. And we're going to dive into this one because this is the part where the pause and having that genuine curiosity mindset is most critical. We need to be able to ask, what is it? Why? What is it? What are we going to do with it? Because we have to be able to communicate the priority to our teams. Without context, our teams are just going to go in checkbox mode, and we don't want that because the output is typically activities. We need to get better at communicating capacity and priority. Always be able to convey your team's universe of opportunities and honest capacity against competing priorities. So whenever you get a request, if you could slow it down, clarify the ask, And before committing, saying I need to assess it against my capacity and competing priorities, then you align and commit. And sometimes it's a no, but sometimes we don't get to say no as mental leaders. And that's the truth of it. Most of the time we are going to have to say yes, but we have to be able to communicate the why and what the trade-offs are when it comes to implementing those initiatives, those are new initiatives. So align and commit, this should all not happen instantaneously. There are 3 separate steps, and they need slowing down, pausing, asking questions. So what does that look like? Clarify and ask. Most of what we're asked to do fall into 2 big buckets. And everything that I saw that you guys listed fall into one of these 2 buckets. Learning opportunity, the insights, going out and listening for something from your medical community, which is your opportunity, your universe of opportunities, or a change in behavior opportunity. And a change in behavior can be something that your MSLs have to change in behavior by implementing a new process, a new system, getting a training to do something, or being asked to do a training, being asked to do some educational things that result in somebody having some knowledge that they didn't have and tracking whether or not that changes behavior. All of these, most of our asks fall into one of these 2 buckets. And the 4 questions are really pretty similar across both. The first thing is, does this topic align with your team's strategic priorities? And a lot of times this is closing care. The big buzz right now that everybody's talking about is the use of care gaps and changing clinical behavior. We all know that everything should align up to that. But we've got to be able to communicate those and assess everything against that. So stop and pause. Does the request align to your team's strategic priorities? Even if it's a change in system or enhanced process, you need to assess, is this going to improve the way my team does X to get to this, to complete the strategic priority, even if it means slowing down before they speed up. Being able to communicate that to your teams is going to help with the change management aspect of it. All right, so next question. Who do you need to learn from, or who is the audience? This is usually another easy one to answer. Meaning, most of the time they'll be able to say, okay, if it's a learning opportunity, we want to hear from community. We want to hear from community HCPs that have academic affiliations. We can get very specific on that. We're looking for HCPs with X number of publications. We are looking for HCPs that are active researchers. We're community HCPs that are active in research. So we can get very specific on who the audience is for the request. If it's a change in behavior, it's internal. If the audience is an MSL, then write it down, man. It's the MSL's the audience. Let's answer these questions. What will we do with information? So here is where the hard filtering starts. Because even with the teams I'm working with now, and I have them start filling out the structured listening priorities. And when we get to the part where what are you going to do with it and when do you need it by, there is a lot of hesitancy to put information in those boxes, a lot, across a lot of teams. And this is, unless you do the hard work of really sort of double clicking into what are you going to do with this information and when do you need it by, it's really hard to communicate how this fits against other priorities. And here's why it's important for the MSL. When the MSL is in a meeting with an HCP and they have a laundry list of everything they need to be listening for, and sometimes the list is so long they're paralyzed. We got to avoid that. For this request to bubble up, for the MSL to remember it, if they understand what the information is going to be used for, it will help with the recall process. And when they know it needs to be completed by a certain date, again, they understand how that connects to priority. So I urge you, if you change nothing about your behavior other than these 2 things, is add in that question of what are you going to do with this information and when do you need it by. It will change the way you prioritize your team's time, and it's very valuable. If it's a change in behavior for your MSL team, how do we know what does success look like? When do we know we're done? That is, and sometimes it's just 100% implementation of the new process. Well, sometimes you might have MSLs that take a little bit longer than others. So pairing them up with somebody who's good at it might be something that helps you get and meet that deadline. Again, the deadline. When do you need it by? So those are the questions that we need to get good at asking. In order to ask those questions, we need to be armed with those strategic framing already, universe of opportunities and competing strategic priorities. It's critical that you practice this out loud, because when I see it all the time when I'm asking MSL leaders, MSL managers to walk me through what their current strategic initiatives are for their team or their listening priorities, I often get insights generation. We're trying to improve patient care. I get world peace level stuff, and that's not operationalizable. So let's start practicing putting, even if it's just one small initiative at a time. This is a skill that needs to be developed, and it's worth, if you do nothing but this, clarifying the ask, practice it. All right. So let's think through when you report internally, what do leadership cross-functional teams ask for most? And while you're thinking, I really want to hear from you on the things that they're asking for the most. But I was working with an MSL manager a couple of weeks ago. Maybe it's been 3 weeks. And one of the things that they're a Quello client, so their insights come in through our platform. And they were about to go into a big leadership meeting, and she was asking me to help analyze her insights. And I don't think she fully understood the full signal that she had in her insights. And one of the things that we uncovered when we were analyzing insight is that they had just done an emerging data release, and MSLs were out delivering it, and they were assessing receptivity, sentiment and receptivity to the new data. While they also had an initiative to understand a couple of clinical decision makings, and they were collecting both of these clinical decision making around the patient in terms of a diagnosis. And what they found out was that 95% positive reception to the data, but only like 15% change in behavior. And so what that does is that creates a great opportunity to understand. And that's the information your leaders are really wanting to understand. Impact. The so what? So we have this opportunity of people are receptive to the data, but it's not enough to change their behavior. Or at least that's what they're saying, that they're still not quite able to picture that patient. So coming up with and here's what we're going to do about it. We're going to have a longitudinal initiative where we're going to go back and we're going to create a campaign in which we assess and then come up with a strategy. Involve your team in developing this and get their feedback on what's working, what's not working, activity interactions. Yeah. So I'm not saying activity metrics go away. That is your foundation. That is your opportunity to learn. That's your universe of how accessibility. But you do have to be able to communicate what that means for interpreting and operationalizing these initiatives that are coming. So yeah, evidence, updates, literature. Yeah. All right. So here is an example of reporting that connects the field work to organizational strategy. When I do the Med-Impact training at organizations, we start with the end in mind, like what we're planning on communicating. And I often use this example or some version of this example where the types of things we should be communicating and how we're communicating it is not that we engaged, 600 HCPs last year or 200 in the last quarter. It's 65% of the HCPs in community practice consistently ask about dosing flexibility. And this is actual data from one of our clients. This is one of the more prominent than the academic, which is not surprising because they're mostly involved in investigators in studies. But the top two reasons is that they're having troubles with concomitant meds and patient adherence. And so that led to a lengthy conversation at the Insights to Action meeting, cross-functional meeting, where it revealed an evidence gap in how dosing and flexibility can be considered. Because we obviously can't make recommendations to the physician if we don't have the data. And there wasn't any data in this particular case. And so what the ask was to just go and do in the next RWE study design meeting to ask for whether or not we can get this data from somewhere, either study data or real world evidence, claims data. Is there any source that we can kind of look into to get some of this data, or can we do some market research? So that was kind of the conversation that came out. Here's what what the miss was and that the challenge was, and people don't quite understand the impact it has on the MSL. So this information has been communicated up, and it had a conversation. Decisions are being made. The MSL has no idea that any of this is happening. And here's how they can use this information. If they know that the company has committed to having some sort of assessment and of the data in Q3, the MSL has information that they can say they have a reason to go back. Dear Dr. Smith, last time you asked me about dosing flexibility, I'd like to provide you, even if you don't have an answer, I'd like to provide you an update and get some more feedback from you, because my organization is going to be talking about it next quarter in their real world evidence thing, and we need your support. Without providing context to the MSL, we're missing opportunities for them to bring feedback to their community when questions like this are asked. Even if you don't have an answer, you still have a reason to go and engage. So it's little things like that that begin to empower, with this feedback loop, it begins to empower the MSL. All right, so what does it mean to provide that signal? The signal strength. Okay, here's an observation that I've had from many clients and myself when I was an MSL manager, is that MSLs say some version of, I have entered that insight in 100 times. What are they not getting? Like, why don't they understand this yet? And the ask is still to go out and ask the same structured questions. Go out and get more information. So what we don't, because of the level of frustration, the lack of clarity on what the information is going to be used for, we don't know how to combat those scenarios where the listing priorities aren't changing, man. They're 2 years old and they're still on there and they're still expected to fill them out. And the MSLs are frustrated because they feel like they're in this weird, vicious loop. And so part of the challenge is it comes down to MSLs I often hear from the manager that the MSLs are frustrated. If you ask them to do one more thing, I'm going to lose my team. And I used to be, as a leader, I used to be very reactionary to that, and it was not good. So, but since I started to develop this sort of curiosity mindset, my response to that is, well, tell me more about that. What exactly about this ask is overwhelming to them that they're willing to leave? And most people say things like that because they're just trying to convey a level of import so that they will be heard. People don't feel, when people start over dramatizing the downstream impact, it's because they don't feel heard. So start the conversation. Tell me more about that. Let's dive into that. I'm assuming you don't mean that everybody's just going to quit tomorrow because of this. So what is causing some frustration on your team? And dive into it, because most of the time, most MSLs, and I interview MSLs all the time, and the number one reason thing that they need from their leaders over and over again is overwhelming. The same, it bubbles up. It's like everything else is like here, and this is the number one reason. I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know why. I don't know what they need this information for. I've entered this insight in I don't know how many times, and I just don't understand what it's being used for. And with that little bit of information, it will change their mindset to go out, and even if they have to ask the question for 2 more years, they understand what it's being used for, that it's a longitudinal assessment, so that we can see even small changes over time, so that we can design a real-world evidence study that is going to really fill in the evidence. Like, that's the information that they need to know. They will do things that seem counterintuitive if they understand why. And so the capabilities that you're providing them, the know-how, is not just the systems, tools, and data. It's the priorities and the structured listing and the training, and everything goes into empowering them to have those deeper conversations. It's not just 4 powerful question skills. I love that webinar. I love that training. Any of you that want your teams to get that training, I love doing it. Many of you on here have gone through that with me. It is a great training. But without the foundational principles in place, that is just a skill that will never get used. So you have to provide context. Otherwise, the skills training is just another binder that goes on the shelf. All right. So some of you have been through our Med Impact model training or seen it or seen the webinar maps that we've done, and on the webinar one of these types of webinars that we've done. And I always come back to it because I love simple frameworks. And if any of you have ever heard me talk, I always often start these sessions off with, my name is Linda Traylor and I'm addicted to frameworks. It's because I am so easily distracted that if I don't have some means of stilling the noise, I get paralyzed. I literally fall into old habits and old behaviors, and I am not an effective leader. So I have no choice but to implement this. And for me, it requires just way more practice than the average human being. I'm telling you the truth here. But what I love most about the impact model is that it forces me to think, to isolate, even though they're super connected, the impact story, which should be at the organizational level, the contribution of each team, how they're contributing to that impact, and not melding those, because that's the team contribution, and then the individual execution strategy that leads to the team contribution. All of those are different things that you need to unpack and have all different strategies and tactics around them. But the overarching impact story, care gaps is bubbling up to be one of those big things now. But in the end, it's a behavior change in clinical practice that leads to improved patient care that we are trying to impact. Our contribution as field medical leaders and as field medical people is to understand the patient journey and the medical community decision-making patient journey and the decision-making, the clinical decisions, overarching where your patient, not every patient, your patient is in that patient journey. And what are those clinical decision makings? So if you're going to look for behaviors, they can't just be improved patient care. That's not measurable. That's as measurable as world peace. It's got to be, we are looking for an increase in said diagnostic tests so that type 1 diabetes patients are diagnosed before, 2 years earlier than normal, or put some numbers to it, going from early detection from currently 27% to 47%. We need to get specific on the behaviors we're trying to change. That helps define the priorities of the contribution of your team, and it helps with the execution strategy and the priorities of engagements. The reason why I put the leadership over here to the right, because leadership is something that you have to own yourself. It always starts with self. And we all know this, and this is not really intended to just be some sort of motivational speech. It's stuff that requires practice and commitment. But doing a self-audit, some of the things that are worthwhile doing is really looking at your ability to communicate your team's priorities, your ability to understand what they're doing and how they're doing, and whether or not they're struggling, and whether or not they have all of the different barriers to their behaviors that you're trying to achieve, just like we do externally. It's important to do this for your teams. What are their drivers of behavior? And it starts with your self-assessment, because your teams depend on you and they're watching you. If you are a check-the-box leader, your teams are going to be check-the-box performers. If you are a defense mode, if a mama bear type of leader, which I was, your team is going to constantly come and say why they can't do something. And then you're going to get in, and it creates a culture. The organization needs to understand your team's value, and that is on you to communicate. And you have resources. You like coming to these events, going to MAPS, reading literature. This is growing, man. There are podcasts galore, literature galore that talks about frameworks and processes that you can use to help empower your team. It's starting to get so many that you have to really be strategic on how you do it, but you have a world of resources to help you. So leadership is something you have to develop. It's not something you're born with. It's something and it takes intention. So if you do nothing else today, well, with the need for longitudinal. Yes, exactly. That is a common thing I hear across a lot of teams. We've answered this question so many times. So I agree with you, Stephanie. If you do nothing else today, just take one. Audit, first of all, start mapping down what your team is doing right now. What are your team's priorities? And avoid the insight generation. Get more specific than that. That's not good enough. I'm going to challenge you. Insights generation, getting ready for launch. That's too world peace level stuff. It needs to be very specific. Get as specific as you can on what your team are doing, how they're spending their time. And then pick one. Focus one priority. Pick one of those and begin to map it to strategic imperatives in a meaningful way that you can communicate. And then practice with a colleague on communicating that. Build that script. And if you don't have a colleague, use AI that you feel comfortable practicing with. Use AI, or DM me or call me or email me and say, I need help. I'd like to practice this with you. I am more than happy to do it because I am on a mission to elevate this profession with strategic leader-minded people. And I really think it is on us to elevate our profession and to get out of the habits we've developed with this sort of pretentious soapbox. We're the source of truth. We can only do this type of mindset. We are strategic partners and we have to act like it. And so if you need help and want to practice, please just email me, DM me on LinkedIn, and I would absolutely listen. If you guys need help with capacity models, we have a free capacity model in Excel spreadsheet that my analytics team has developed. Just scan that QR code right there, field team capacity, and or send us a message and we'll get it to you. Everybody's going to get a copy of these slides afterwards and in the follow-up emails. If you want to understand a little bit more about the impact model that I referred to, we have a couple of webinars on that, and the QR code is there. If you need help with any of this, I'm here. I don't mind 30-minute conversations at no charge to help kick this off. So please don't feel like you're going to get a sales pitch when you call me. Just call me or just email me. I'm happy to help. I can't say this enough. As a field medical leader, you are the only person in your organization who represents your in-house field medical experts that are directly connected to the medical community. That's who you represent as a manager of MSLs. The medical experts that are building deep relationships with the medical community, that are exhibiting the behaviors you guys care about and are trying to impact. It's not a burden, that's the job, but it does take effort, purposeful effort to lead from it. I'm here to help. Please email me, and thank you for joining. Bye-bye.